All right, November 18th. What's up, everybody? Another episode of Stand Tall, diving right into chapter 3 of The Art of War. Let's see, verse 7. With his forces intact, he will dispute the mastery of the empire, and thus, without losing a man, his triumph will be complete. This is the method of attacking by stratagem. Number 8. It is the rule in war: if our forces are 10 to the enemy's 1, to surround him; if 5 to 1, to attack him; if twice as numerous, to divide our army in two. Let's jump over to an alternate translation. Master Sun says, so the rule for use of military is if you outnumber the opponent 10 to 1, then surround them; 5 to 1, attack; 2 to 1, divide. Cao Cao says that when you outnumber the enemy 10 to 1, then surround them. That is, if the generals are equal in intelligence and in bravery, and the soldiers are equal in competence. When you outnumber the enemy 5 to 1, use 3/5 of your forces for direct attacks, and the other 2/5 for surprise attacks. If you outnumber the enemy 2 to 1, then divide your forces into two parts, and for direct assault and one for surprise attacks. Dumu says that it takes 10 times as many soldiers to surround an opponent because you have to set your encirclement up at the same distance from the enemy. So the area you are covering is large, and you have to be on strict guard. Thus, if you do not have a lot of soldiers, there will be gaps and leaks. Now, if there is a division among the ranks of the enemy so that there is no coherent chain of command, then they will fall apart by themselves, even if you do not surround them. If you do surround them under such circumstances, needless to say, they will be annihilated. When Master Sun says you need 10 times their number to surround the enemy, this is when your leaders are equal in intelligence and courage and your soldiers are equal in competence, not when there is dissension on the enemy's own ranks. Ho Yangqi says that when you calculate and compare the strength of your forces and those of your opponent, take into account the talent, intelligence, and courage of the generals. If you are 10 times stronger than the enemy, this is 10 to 1, and you can surround them, foiling any attempts to get away. Dumu says that if you are 5 to 1 against your enemies, then you should take 3/5 of your forces, divide them into 3 units to attack the enemy from one side, keeping back 2/5, watching for points of unpreparedness on the opponent's part and taking advantage of them by surprise attacks. Chen Hao says that when your forces are said to be 5 times those of the enemy, this just means you have extra power. Their forces are deployed here and there, so how could you attack them by only 3 routes? The specific numbers here only refer to attacking a citadel. Dumu is saying that if you are 2 to 1 against your opponent, you should take part of the forces. You should take part of your forces and have them head for the opponent's critical points, or attack some point that the opponent will surely go to defense, so that the opponent will split off to go to the rescue, and you can use the other part of your forces to strike them. The principles of war are not a matter of numbers. In every engagement, there are both surprises and frontal attacks, and you do not wait until you have a lot of soldiers to set up reserves for surprise attacks. Du Yu says that when you outnumber the opponent 2 to 1, then one part of your attack force makes a direct assault, one part makes surprise attacks, as they are insufficient to adapt. This confuses the opponent's soldiers and separates them from their army. So a great warrior emperor said, if you cannot divide and move, you cannot talk about surprise maneuvers. So all of this is to say that it's very important to be aware of your own strengths and weaknesses, your own limitations. And every situation you go into, you might be very confident because you have 10 times the experience, you've done it 100 times, or you might have only done it 2 times. And so you really need to be more strategic about how you're going to approach the situation. So let's go over to the Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman, November 18th. 4 Habits of the Stoic Mind. Our rational nature moves freely forward in its impressions when it, number 1, accepts nothing false or uncertain; number 2, directs its impulses only to act for the common good; 3, limits its desires and aversions only to what's in its own power; and number 4, embraces everything nature assigns it. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations 8.7. If you notice, Marcus repeatedly reminds himself what Stoicism is. These bullet points are helpful to those of us reading thousands of years later, but really they were intended to be helpful to him. Maybe that day he had accepted a bad impression or had acted selfishly. Maybe he had pinned his hopes on something outside his control or complained and fought against something that had happened. Or maybe it had just been a while since he'd thought about those things and wanted a reminder. Whatever his case was, or whatever ours is today, let's align our minds along these 4 critical habits. Accept only what is true. Work for the common good. Match our needs and wants with what is in our control. And number 4, embrace what nature has in store for us. So by accepting only what is true, we have to, just like Sun Tzu says, we have to know, are we 10 to 1, 5 to 1, or 2 to 1? We've got to work for the common good. Given that we only know if we are 10 to 1, 5 to 1, or 2 to 1, what's the common good? What's going to be best for the army? What's going to be best for our employees? What's going to be best for our emotions? Match our needs and wants with what is in our control. And so, just like being able to be introspective and reflective, knowing what our strengths and weaknesses are, that's what we need to try to match our needs to what we can control. Embrace what nature has in store for us. No matter what, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And so, whatever nature has in store for us, we have to accept the way. We have to just, whatever the obstacle presents us. And that's why we continue to read and reflect on the ancient wisdom of these guys, because without it, then we won't be 10 to 1. We'll be more likely to be 2 to 1. And what we need to do is stand tall and try to be 10 to 1.